It's a pleasure to welcome all of you who have joined for this very interesting session. It's a book reading session and at IIIT. And it's a pleasure to see all of you joining this session on Zoom, and some of you are probably watching it on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining. My name is Amit Prakash. I'm a faculty member here at IIIT. For those who don't know me, and the idea behind this session is to explore our rich Indian linguistic traditions, because we are an Indian international institute, and we have within our community many enthusiasts of various Indian languages, and we thought it's a good opportunity for us to explore that, to kind of introduce or to kind of expose ourselves, faculty members, staff, students, to the rich Indian linguistic traditions that we all have. And with that intention, we have started this series, and it's a pleasure to have Professor Sadagopan, our director, inaugurate and give the inaugural reading in this series. Professor Sadagopan, we all know, and in his traditional characteristic style has said, I should not take more than 2 sentences to introduce him. So I will not go into a lot of details. We know how multifaceted a personality Professor Sadagopan is, and this is one of his various multiple facets that we'll get a peek into in the next 1 hour or so. So over to you, sir, for your reading of the Tamil classic Silappadhikaram.
So thank you all. So I think this is a very interesting occasion when we are all meeting, because this is actually a book reading session. It is not really a lecture. See, normally we are all used to a lecture, and over the years, lectures have taken a format, what generally people call as a sage on the stage and walk with the talk, okay? There is no such thing, okay? So in a sense, it is more like a reading together, and at least I can tell you that I am no scholar of Silappadhikaram. In fact, couple of days back, I discovered we have Professor Vijay Padki with us. I see his picture on one of the, thank you, sir. And I discovered that he has deep interest in Silappadhikaram through Professor Vyasalu. And then he has written a book and even has enacted a drama in the Bangalore Little Theatre. So I think it's good. I think that is precisely the purpose of sessions like this. We all have other parts of our personality other than the courses we teach and the areas of our research. And that is so in a process if we can discover that. So, you know, in Sanskrit, there is a nice term called Sahridaya. Everybody have heard of the word Sahodara, Sahodari, which is siblings, because we share the womb of the mother, but something similar, shared values, shared thought processes are called Sahridayas. We are all Sahridayas. And I think what brings all of us together is our willingness or our interest in making the experience of learning for our next generation of students much better than what we had, okay? So how to enrich an amazing learning experience while they are in the institute is something which brings all of us together. And sessions like this, where we explore things beyond the normal curricular activities. I still remember my professor asking me an interesting question. Did you read a book which you are not required to read? Did you take a course which you are not required to take? And so things like that. So I think this is not something which we have to do, but we do because we are kind of finding it interesting. And the context for this itself is interesting. The next slide, please. Okay, so Amit is the sutradhar for this. So it is interesting. We all have a WhatsApp group where we keep posting things. 23rd July, 9:31 a.m. So there was a nice posting, and just couple of hours back, we had a series of posts about Tricha and Meenakshi sharing their farm produce, because one is in a farmland in Tamil Nadu, other one is in some kind of a rooftop farm. And out of that, Amit had made an interesting comment. We have a lot of expertise and interest available in several languages. Okay, can we not think of sharing this rich linguistic traditions? And then he suggested it will be helpful if you can identify a set of volunteers. This is something which was close to my heart. So within 10 minutes, I did respond to him that this is something which is so good. And in the Institute, 2004, we started something called an ethnic day, where people get dressed with the local dresses. It kind of died off after a few years. But I think in the last couple of years, thanks to Jaya, it is still very active. I think typically on the New Year's Day or something like that. Okay. And of course, we have been having Speak Magay program. But I thought that we could really celebrate. I think India is an unusual country in terms of diversity. If we can celebrate, I think nothing like that. So this is basically celebration of our linguistic diversity. And then I volunteered with Tamil Book. And I found that within a couple of minutes, Shiva had volunteered for Telugu. And our Sujit, he's always interested in exploring. He does a lot of excursion into paintings and other things. So he actually put a nice statement. I have been wishing to make excursions into the various regional language literatures. And then interestingly, he opted for Hindi. And that is something very special about IIITB. We have a Navy person turned registrar. Okay, so he has lots of interest in Hindi. And similarly, we have two Bengali people, one Ashish and other Sujit. They have deep interest in Hindi. So it's kind of nice, I think. So I think that is the backdrop of the whole thing. But interestingly, I think Amit, you should get a lot of credit. You know, I think in less than a month, we are actually able to start. Hopefully, this will actually become an interesting course, maybe taught by multiple people, and very interesting course for our future generation of students. So this is how I planned this talk. Okay, I thought it is kind of interesting for many of you to kind of explore the Tamil literature. And I chose one book, and I think Amit and I have been kind of talking of the structuring the whole thing. So the way we structure it, we kind of give the backdrop of the whole thing, take one particular piece, talk about that piece, typically a classic in that language, and then read a couple of passages. Obviously, because people may not know the language, significant number of people may not know the language, reading too much of the language possibly will kind of make it a little uninteresting. So we are going to make that part very short. So I have actually taken 6 couplets, okay, from Silappadhikaram, and then we'll also kind of go through the translation. And in the process, I also allude to some nice things, because literature also is embedded with a lot of cultural aspects of the civilization at that time, which includes commerce, geography, music, dance, arts, and a whole bunch of them. And of course, the format is interactive. So anytime you can kind of stop me. Okay. And Karthik, okay, just to look at the chat in case there is anything, you can kind of stop me. Okay. So this is how we will do for about 40 minutes. Then we'll have time for about 20 minutes of questions. So you see, it is interesting for Tamil. So particularly people who are not familiar with this Tamil is a kind of one of the languages which are spoken by significantly large number of people, about 75 million in India and another million outside, which includes a whole bunch of Southeast Asian countries, and of course Sri Lanka, Singapore and Malaysia is what we normally associate. Because of MIIT, we keep going to Myanmar, and we do find that Myanmar has a good Tamil population. And similarly, even in places like Philippines and Indonesia, there are small pockets. And also it's very interesting that even the name Tamil, that sound ra, is kind of relatively rare in other languages. It is not la, it is not la. And sometimes, unless you are kind of seasoned, you don't get it. Most of the time, in much of the northern India, it becomes Tamil, okay, which is Tamil, that is how we write it in English, but it is actually, and Tamil as a language also has some very unusual characteristic. The aspirated and the unaspirated consonants, we use the same symbol. So the is the four symbols which we have in typically most languages. Of course, Sanskrit is the one. I just put the Devanagari script. So the one symbol which you see is used for Tamil, Patthar, Dan, Dhan. So obviously what happens is the grammar cannot be context free, so it is very contextual. And one of my students puts it very nicely in a signal processing sense. This is a classic case of lossy compression because you are actually using one symbol far more effectively. Okay, so the reason why I chose the Silappadhikaram, even the Silappadhikaram, the way, because of this not distinguishing the aspirated and the unaspirated consonants, Silappadhikaram itself will be written so differently in English type by so many people. Sometimes you will find yes, sometimes it starts with C, okay. So, but Silappadhikaram is one of the 5 great epics of Tamil literature, okay. Jivaka Chintamani, Silappadhikaram, Mani Mehalai, Kundalakesi, and Valayapati. These are the, okay. And all of them are extremely interesting. All of them are fairly large. I think they all are 5,000 plus kind of lines. So it is interesting how they have managed to preserve it over so long, much before the Gutenberg and printing technology developed. But things have been around for quite some time. That is sometimes very amazing how they managed to do that. Okay. So Tamil has a significantly large literature and also for a long tradition. And I should kind of, I've been kind of fortunate. I grew up in this town called Madras, now called Chennai, and too in an area called Mylapore. And the adjacent mohalla is Thiruvallikeni, or now called Triplicane. This Mylapore and Triplicane in Chennai have recorded history of 2,000 plus years. So it's interesting, the recorded history of 2,000 plus years. And of course, they kind of centered around 2 temples. One is called Kapalishwara temple, other is called Patsarthi temple. And one is a Shaivite literature, other is a Vaishnavite literature. But nonetheless, they do have a fairly long tradition of literary masterpieces. And up to the 4th century and a couple of centuries prior to the 2000 is called the Sangam period. So I think this is something which textbooks talk about it. I think current generation of students would know at least called Sangam period. They may not know the details, but at least they would have heard about it. And the one which I have taken today, Silappadhikaram, belongs to this particular Sangam period. And then, of course, the post-Sangam period and the modern one. And interestingly, the Bhakti movement, which has been kind of documented extremely well across the length and breadth of the country, has influenced quite a bit the Tamil literature. And there is a whole bunch of, there are 12 saints, Tamil saints called Alvars, okay? And their work, about 4,000 stanzas, is called Pasuram. And then there are 64 Shaivite saints called Nayanmars, and they have something called Tirumurai. So you can see that we are really talking of something like close to 50,000 couplets of literature in fairly interesting Tamil. And because this happened over centuries, you also will see a little bit of evolution. So it's also interesting to study the evolution of the language itself. Perhaps the one which is widely known in the recent history, because these are all just a couple of centuries old, the Kamba Ramayanam, actually formally inaugurated in the Srirangam temple, and Periya Puranam. These are the 2 well-known classic literature. Once again, large pieces, several thousands of stanzas. And what is interesting is that throughout this time, you will find fairly significant influence of Buddhist and Jain scholars. In fact, Silappadhikaram, the author, Ilango Adigal himself, is a Jain monk. Okay? And of course, towards the end, I also will talk about how the language actually has been used during the freedom movement, and even today, politically, it has some interesting connotations. Okay?
Sir, there's one question.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Person says, do you have Dvivachana in classical Tamil as in Sanskrit?
Oh, okay. Dvivachana in classical Tamil as in Sanskrit. Okay, it's an interesting question. Okay. Okay, on the face of it, we don't have, but there are sometimes they use it. Okay, this is not widely used. It's in Sanskrit, it permeates the language. It is there. Okay, but in some pockets, it is there in Tamil. Okay, so I'm not necessarily a full Tamil scholar, but I can, but it's an interesting question. Yes, it's an important. So, Silappadhikaram, that is how the word Silappadhikaram comes. Silambu is an anklet, a kind of, until recently it used to be the footwear which women wear, and it is quite artistically done. At least in Silappadhikaram, it is made out of gold and, some kind of a precious metal. It even has some nice germs which are fitted inside. It kind of, it is aligned to the personality, etc., etc. So in some sense, it is a precious jewel, even though it is an anklet. So, in fact, a lot of times, if you read the literature, Silappadhikaram itself is referred to as the tail of the anklet. Okay, so that is how the name comes. Ilango is the author, and of course, just as we put G in North India, so in Tamil, a lot of times you put this word Adigal. It is more like a respect, Ilango Adigal. And he happens to be the brother of a ruling king. So, in some sense, he was a poet, he was a monk, he was also a half prince. And he has been a prolific writer. He also wrote the Jivaga Chintamani. So, what is interesting is, to give the context, Silappadhikaram has lots of, it is a more, I would say, literature with a varied thing. It has Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu themes. And it is not necessarily in a preaching style, okay? But the other one, the Jiva Chintamani, is a very preaching style, so it is primarily the Jain one. So it is interesting how the same author could actually produce two works where the scopes are quite different. And you will find this karma and ahimsa kind of coming back and forth. And if you want to kind of pursue further, this is probably one of the best known, what is called authentic edition, at least available in English, the V.R. Ramchandra Dikshidhar, 1939, London, Oxford University Press. And U.V. Swaminathan Iyer, for many who grew up in Tamil Nadu would know, he was one person who really did significant amount of contribution to Tamil literature in the recent time. He was there until, I think he passed away in 1940s, okay? So, and he was formally trained, in some sense, he had equivalent of a PhD and stuff like that. He was teaching, and generally he is called a Tamil Tata. So he's a person who did document. So he's the person who actually got the entire Silappadhikaram Tamil original edition redone, got it published, etc., etc. So a lot of credit goes to him. Okay, so this is something which it's kind of interesting. This is printed in Chennai, but still part of the Oxford University Press. So let me get into a little bit of the structure. Okay, so it's about 5,000 plus lines of poetry. So you actually find it is significantly a large piece of work. It's not a small piece of work. And the cantos are it is called Kandam in Tamil, called Puhar Kandam, Madurai Kandam, and Vanchi Kandam. Puhar, Madurai, and Vanchi represent three geographic zones, in some sense a small town. I'll show you a map in next slide. So Puhar, even today you will find some of the handicraft stores from Tamil Nadu are called Puhar. Okay, so, and it's a port town. So, and this happens to be from the Chola kingdom. So in a sense, going through Silappadhikaram, you also get a good feel for the Chola, Pandya, and the Chera. So the three large kingdoms in those times. And you also find lots of references, including reference to a king in Sri Lanka. So you will find that you get a lot of information about geography, the flora and fauna, little bit about the kings, the kingdom, etc. But also what is special about Silappadhikaram is, unlike many of the scriptures of that era, this is about a common man. So most of the time, the hero or the central piece of the edifice, the central piece of the work would be a king or a queen or a rishi or a Mahatma or Rama or Krishna. But here it is a very common man. And normally in most of the other works, you will find that the king would actually give a punishment to somebody, somebody, etc. But here it is a reverse. The common person called Kannagi actually gives a punishment, and actually the king dies. So it's a very interesting kind of a story. So you get access to the Chola, Pandya, and Chera. And you also get a fairly vivid description of those rivers, the Kaveri, the Vaihai, and stuff like that. And you also get to know that at least some parts of areas like Tiruvannamalai, etc., which are kind of little barren today, but they used to be fairly mini forests, those areas. So you actually get an interesting way to look at geography today and the geography there. Okay, and the key characters are Kovalan and Kannagi, the husband and wife, and they actually start their life in a town called Puhar. And somewhere along, Kovalan has a little bit of strays out of the wedlock and goes after a lady called Madhavi. And interesting, he comes back and accepted by Kannagi, and they thought that they should start a new life because he lost all his money, and the only thing they had was the jewelry of Kannagi, and they thought that they could probably go to Madurai. So in some sense you will find, even those days, moving to towns for a livelihood, towns and cities as economic powerhouses were there even those days, even though we are talking of nearly 2000 years back. And of course, in this town called Madurai, so what is very nice for many of us is that lots of descriptions of Madurai town are intact even today. Okay, so I think that is something which is very nice about Madurai as a city, is a living city all through. And of course, Kovalan loses his life. He has been incorrectly blamed for the theft of the queen's anklet. And the first one is 10 chapters, second one is 13 chapters, the last one is little short, just about 7 chapters. Okay, the next slide.
Question from Professor Srinivas Prasanna.
Yeah.
Does
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Kanban refer to Valmiki as the Adikavi? And second question is Kandam the same as Kanda in Sanskrit? Okay,
so Prasanna, I think both are interesting questions. Okay, so Kamban refers to Valmiki, sometimes as Adikavi, sometimes not as Adikavi. Both our references are there. But he's not always given the Adikavi status. Okay, Kandam and Kandam. Okay, so you see, they are similar. It is something like Puram and Puri. Okay, but are they exactly the same? We don't know, because a lot of times these things are similar things. Okay, they are similar exactly. Yes. Thank you, Prasanna.
Yeah, which is the oldest language in the world?
Okay,
is the first question, and the second one says from Karthik Kunjitapam. Interesting. Remember going to Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu, which has a museum with Kannagi statues and history.
Okay, it's very nice. I'm glad you had gone there. Of course, which is the oldest language, I just would know. And I would probably kind of request you, just don't spend time on those things, because it is impossible to kind of trace some of these things, and it also can be lead into controversy. A lot of people in Tamil Nadu feel that Tamil is the oldest language. Okay, but this is an emotive stuff. Okay, so you could just see Kaveri Pumpattinam, which you see on the coastal town, okay, which is part of the Chola kingdom. This is where the main characters of Silappadhikaram, the Kovalan and the Kannagi, this is where they started their living. And then they moved to this Pandya kingdom, which is capital of Madurai. This is where they were trying to set up their livelihood. Unfortunately, Kovalan lost his life and Kannagi lost her cool. And then, of course, the history is that she kind of moved to one of the Western Ghats hills, and that is where she is supposed to have gone up to the heavens and things like that. So, and you will find a good amount of description of these rivers. And Urayur is outskirts of Trichy, and that is where they have actually spent a couple of nights together on way to Madurai. And good description of Urayur is also there in Silappadhikaram. Okay, so let us see. That is, oh, Sachit, you have a question. What does the name of the book mean? I think you possibly missed it earlier. It is Silambu plus Adhikaram. Silambu is an anklet. Okay, so that is how the Silappadhikaram comes. So loosely translates to tail of the anklet. So that is how the name comes. Okay, thanks, Sachit. Okay, I will kind of, I think it is just, okay, this slide and the next slide. Okay, I would like you to kind of read. It just gives a little bit of the story of the Silappadhikaram. Okay, and I think it is easier for you to read it much faster than my reading it. So it is interesting that you would actually see a statue of Kannagi in Marina Beach in Chennai. So you will find that the facial gesture is she's really angry, and she has an anklet in her hand, and so she's supposed to have kind of cursed the Madurai town. Apparently, the whole town went on flames, etc., etc. Okay, so that is one reason why even in Chennai, this statue goes through some controversy, because people think that it will do bad to the city of Chennai, etc., etc. Read the next one, next slide. Okay. Yeah, it's a little detailed one. The reason why I put, I'm sure many of you would have heard of, would have read this book by A.L. Basham, The Wonder That Was India. So it is Basham stuff. And the reason why I put this out is it's a lot of interesting points that, you know, the jeweler who is the official jeweler of the kingdom, he himself steals the queen's anklet and was kind of afraid that he will be caught one day. And he had a convenient excuse of Kovalan having Kannagi's one, and he just ensured that the justice is delivered too fast. So before anything could be realized, that he managed to get him hanged. Okay, so in a sense, you find that quite often people in their haste to get justice, in fact, do gross injustice, and that is something which you will find. Okay, and you will find towards the end that Kannagi, because of this particular incident, she also became, even today in many parts of Tamil Nadu, there are temples for Kannagi, and she is kind of associated with, she's kind of hailed as a kind of a special lady or a special Mataji. Okay, so she's deified. I think that is precisely what. And there are also festivals. Just as we have Draupadi is also given a similar stature called Draupadi Amman, and we also have Kannagi Amman. Okay, so in a sense, the story is not any compelling story or any such thing. Okay, it's a kind of relatively ordinary story. But I think what makes Silappadhikaram so special is an ordinary person's life is made into something extraordinary, because by the sheer depth of the poetry, the descriptions, and the way, I think the compelling way in which the story is told. And in fact, I think it is also interesting when Kannagi realizes that she has been done wrong, she comes back to the king's court and says that, this is what has happened. And then she said, I will prove this. So what she does was she breaks open her anklet. Apparently, her anklet had some special marbles which were not there in the queen's one, because the queen's one also only one was stolen. So they brought the other one and they found that that was different. And when the king realized, the king makes the statement, I have not caught the thief. I am the thief. I have not caught the thief. I am the thief. And apparently he collapses and he dies. So it's quite dramatically done. And Ilango Adigal, the author himself, has actually put this as a broad kind of objectives. This is part of the early part of Silappadhikaram. The 3 lines, let me read. Arasiyal Piழைத்தோர்க்கு அரங்கூற்றாவதும். Arasiyal Piழைத்தோர்க்கு, that means a king or a royal who deviates from dharma, arankaatravu, okay, then they will be punished. Uraisal pattinikku uyarndor ethalum, okay, they hail the mobility of chastity in women. Urvinai uruttuvadum undu uruttu vanduttum என்பதும், the inevitability of the effects of wrongdoings in the previous birth, okay. So, that like other Indian languages, Tamil also has this one, that we have samyukta aksharas, and over the centuries, the way in which we break and make or kind of join have changed. So in a sense, even our current generation, we do not necessarily read it the same way. So that's a little bit, simply because it is a old, like, Kannada, we say Hale Kannada. So this is a Hale Tamil, okay? And in some sense, it is interesting. It's a moralistic story. So that is how it starts with. But somewhere along, it essentially becomes very interesting. Okay, let us see that. Okay, there's one more question. Under what genre can this book be categorized? Is it tragedy, like how Shakespeare has classified, or something else? Okay, so I'm not the best person to answer it, because you see, many of these things are stories, okay, and you will find that, yes, you could think of it as a tragedy, but I think the story itself is less of importance than the way in which the story is told. Okay. The anklet plays a clinching role in a judicious decision. Yes, the anklet does play a clinching role in a decision, in the final decision. Yeah. So I think what is unique about this, okay, the diversity of the setting. So when leaving the city of Puhar, so there is a nice description of a Vishnu temple, Buddhist vihar, not one, but 7 of them, and a whole bunch of wandering Jain monks kind of going around asking for a bhiksha. And all these things are within 1 mile. Okay, so there is a kind of a distances are also mentioned. That means there's a fair amount of diversity of religions and a reasonable amount of peace among them. Not that people are not fighting, but the question is if they were not fighting all the time. I think that is important. And this description of the 3 cities, in fact, there is a description of the Kanchi city also where they stop over. And it's amazing that you will find, there's a talk of multi-storied structures, 7-storied structures and stuff like that. And forests are extremely well described. Okay, I think the flora and fauna are, and there are also references to towns outside of the Tamil Nadu. There is a lot of reference to Kashi. Apparently, some people in between went to Kashi and coming back. The whole description of travel back and forth is there. Sri Lanka finds a lot of mention. There is even rivers in Sri Lanka find mention. There is a specific name of a king by name Gajabahu, who is a Sri Lankan king. And so the scholars essentially say that Silappadhikaram, to some extent, is the epitome of what is called the Iyal Isai Nadagam, the 3 parts of the linguistic richness, the poetry, the music, and the dance. So culturally, all 3 elements. Okay, it is just not a piece of poetry alone, but it also has inbuilt, and because it is all poetic, so many of them have been set to music. You will actually hear a couple of them in the next couple of minutes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to show 6 stanzas and they happen to be from one of the poetic piece called Kuravai Kutu. So the setting is that Kovalan reaches Madurai, and Kannahi kind of sends him out to kind of sell the anklet to make some money, and with that money they can start a small business. At that time, there was a Sakhi of Kannahi who finds some not so good omen, and she says that, look, this is not good, your husband is leaving, this is not the best time, maybe something is not good. Then they say, let us do a small little prayer. The prayer is kind of to Lord Krishna. Okay. So it is interesting. Vadavarayai Mattaki. Okay, this is the mantra. This is basically the Samudram ki. Vasukiyai Nanaki. Vasuki is the serpent, and then you make that into a rope. So essentially you have a base and a rope, you kind of start churning. And then it says Kadal Vannan Pandurunal. Once upon a time, Kadal Vannan, Krishna with the blue hue, which is the color of the ocean. Kadal Vair Kalakkinaye. So he actually churned the ocean of milk. Okay. And then it says that with the same hands, Kalakkina, okay. Vadavarayai Mattaki Vasuhiyai Nanaki Kadal Vannan Pandurunal Kadal Vair Kalakkinaye. Same Kai is hands, Kalakkiya Kai, the same churning hands. Yashodayar Kadai Kayitral Kattungai. With the same hands, you are also kind of tied with a rope, okay, by Yashoda, okay, to discipline you. Malar Kamala Undiyai Mayamo. Okay, so we all know that the notion of a Brahma coming out of the navel of the Lord Vishnu. Malar Kamala Undiyai Mayamo. Marud Kaite is not very commonly used in today's Tamil. It's an old Tamil. We are amazed. Okay, so in a sense, it refers partly to Amritamantan and also partly to Samudramanthan, also to the Krishnaavatara, the so-called Balalila. Okay. So I just thought that it kind of nice because Yamma Subbalakshmi decided to use these particular 6 stanzas in her UN concert. So I thought just kind of to give a break, let us have this audio, just 1 minute. Okay. Ivanendre Amarar Kanam Toludeta. Arupurul Ivanandre Amarar Kanam Toludeta. The celestial praised you that you are the ultimate. Okay, Arupurul. Amarar is the Devas, celestials. Okay. Urupasi Undrindriye Ulahadaya Undanaye. Without being hungry, you ate the whole world. Okay, this is a common tradition in Puranic literature. The Lord kind of eats the whole world, spits it out, etc. And of course, just as there, it was connecting the same hands which did the Samudra Manthan to the hands that were tied by Yashoda. Something similar. Undavai Kalavinad Uri Vennai Undavai. He did the same mouth that also ate the butter that was stolen. And some of you would have seen there is a nice depiction of Yashoda seeing the Lord's, the world itself in the Lord's mouth. Okay, so reference to that. And Vantulai Malayai Mayamo Marutkaite. Tulai is Tulasi. Okay, Tulasi har. Okay, so Vantulai Malaya, you are wearing the Tulasi garland and you are a mystery, and that amazes us. Okay. Arupurul Ivanandre Amararganam Tuldeta Urupasi Undrindriye Ulahadaya Undanaye Undavai Kalavinal Urivenai Undavai Vantulai Malayai Mayamo Marutkaite. So mostly reference to Puranic literature. Okay, so thank you. There are a couple of questions in the chat session. Nice observation. Emma Subbalakshmi herself hails from the city of Madurai. Yes, that is a very nice observation. And so, okay, someone, Ganeshan, has asked for sharing the MSS link. It is very much there. I think there will be a posting. I think Amit will post the whole thing. So it is there. You can use my slides. And do you have the same chandas as in Sanskrit, Anushtup, etc.? See, okay, every language is different. Okay, so there are chandas, but the way in which they are used are slightly different. And I'm not necessarily an expert in music, but when I talk to my musical friends, they tell me they're slightly different. Okay, so I think you should talk to people like Bombay Jayashree. They actually have fairly knowledgeable on that. Okay. Tirandamada Tuldetum, as the celestials gather and praise you. Thirumal is Vishnu. Nin Shangamala Irandadiyan Mubulahum Irulthira Nadandanaye. So this is about the Vamana Avatara. With your lotus red feet, you cross the three worlds and to redeem from the people the evil environment, essentially getting back from the Asuras for the Devas. Okay. And of course, just as earlier it was relating the hands and the mouth, now it relates the feet. Okay, the same feet. Irandadiyal Mugulahum Irulthira Nadandanaye Nadanda Adi. The same feet. Panjavarka Tudaha Nadanda Adi. You actually played the role of a diplomatic mission for Panchavas. With the same feet, you went on to a diplomatic mission on behalf of the Pandavas. Madangalai Marattai. This refers to Narasimha-dara. Madangalai Marattai Mayamo Marutkaite. Okay. So in some sense you will find the stanzas are similar, but you will find the next three are slightly different. Okay. So let us have the audio for
There's one more question. Is the music set by a composer of old? I don't know.
Okay, the music was set by, I think, some Venkatraman, because you see, I will come back to it a little bit, you know. So these Okay. So M.S. Subbulakshmi gave a performance in United Nations. Remember, we are talking of 1966, less than 20 years after India's independence. Okay. So that was a big deal as far as the country was concerned. So what happened was it was viewed as a diplomatic mission on the part of the country. So lots of people got together, and then the Kanchi Paramacharya set a special song about the peace for the world called Maitri Bhajata. And then Rajaji was personally involved in the choice of that. They wanted to represent the whole of the country. There was a Meera Bhajan. And from Tamil, they chose this particular piece. Okay. And then M.S. Subbulakshmi worked with, if I understand, there is one Venkatraman. I'm not very good at, I'm not necessarily knowledgeable about music. I only enjoy music. Apparently, one Venkatraman set the music. So that's all I know. But you will find a lot more information.
I think Professor Shisha has also commented.
Shisha, okay. Cross three words, obviously, for Trivikrama. Vamana to Trivikrama, yes. Yes.
No.
All right, thank you. I just used the word Vamana, but Vamana is Trivikrama, both are part of the spectrum. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Muvulahum Iradiyan, Murai Niramba Vahaimudiya, Taviya Shevadi Shepa Tambiyodum Kanpondu. Okay. So one is Muvulaham Iradiyan with the three words in 2 steps he kind of measured. And the same foot we actually kind of walked. This is Ramavatara. Tambi Odum along with the Lakshmana, Tamil called Ilakkuvan, and all over the forest, Kanbondu, Shoranum Pormadiya Tolilangai. So he went all the way to Sri Lanka and managed to kill Ravana. So Aranum Pormadiya Tolilangai Kattalitha Sevahansir Kelada Seviyanna Seviye. So next to 2 stanzas also, this is part of the very strong Bhakti movement where the intensity comes up. So the idea is that you should be so engrossed in the Lord, nothing else should matter. So you will find in this one, he says, what is the use of the ears if you don't hear about him? Not listening to the greatness of the Vishnu, Thirumal, is really a waste of that organ. The next one will talk about the eyes, okay? And so in a sense, it is intense devotion, okay? Just have the audio. Okay, there is a nice question from Sujit. The epic seems to discuss the coexistence of 3 kingdoms, Chera, Chola, Pandya. We get a sense that kings always used to be at war with each other. Is there any depiction of inter-kingdom politics and diplomacy in those times? Sujit, quite a bit. So it is true that they were fighting, but it is not that they are fighting all the time. And you will find that people were kind of showing respect, and a lot of times people used to be invited by other kings, and you will find there is a certain amount of sharing. You will actually find that, there are what is called the architecture, mostly the temple architecture. So people were sharing some of the ideas of one kind of architecture from one part of the country to other part of the country. So in a sense, it is both fighting and kind of doing together. Periyavanai, Mayavanai, Perulaham Yallam. He is supreme. He is an expert in creating illusions. Mayavan. Okay, this is Maya Jal Vakarne Wale. Viri Kamala Undiyudai Vinnavanai Kannum. Okay, the lotus on his navel, which carries the words, is essentially Brahma. Tiruvadiyum Kayyum Tiruvayum Shaya. So you will find a lot of times in the Puranic literature, you will find description of the various limbs of the Lord. This is part of, again, the Bhakti movement, Mamo Pankajanabhaya, Namo Pankajamaline, so lotus eyed, lotus hands, etc., etc. But this is a recurring theme. So last time it was, if you don't listen to him, what use is your ears? Here it says, Kannimaitu Kanbardam Kannenna Kanne. So you should not even wink when you are looking at the Lord, because that is the intensity with which you are expected to be looking at the Lord. One has to look at him without blinking in order to realize the value of the eyes. The audio, please. Okay. Madantadum Nenjattu Kanjanar Vanjam Kadandane. This is Krishna conquering. Kamsan is Kanjanar. Vanjam Kadandane. Nutruvarpal Natrisayum Potra Padandaranam Muranga Panjavarku Tudu Nadandane. In order to kind of help the Pancha Pandavas and to kind of vanquish the Kauravas, okay, he kind of walked all the way. Narandane Yetada Navenna Nave, Narayana Yenna Navenna Nave. This is something similar. So, the three organs. Say one was the eye, other one was the ear, this is the tongue. Okay. So essentially, if the tongue does not utter the name Narayana, what is the best use? What is the use of it? Again, a very strong bhakti tradition. The last audio.
There is one comment on YouTube from one of our alumni, Karthik. Without a revolt, a woman can't get what she wants. Only Kannagi has a statue. There is no statue for Sita.
Okay. Very good observation. Very good observation. So, but the only thing I would say is that, see, a lot of times there's a kind of a feeling that maybe for a long time women were too meek. It is not true. Here was a very assertive woman also. Okay. So the reason why I chose this M.S. Subbulakshmi stuff is, one is, of course, many of us kind of enjoy this particular stuff from MS, and because 1966, it was a kind of heyday so for us. So I think for many of us as students in 70s, we do visit United Nations building in New York and actually go to the hall where MS performed. So it's kind of a nice connect. And I also thought that a talk like this, little bit of, like if you don't know Tamil, so when somebody reads Tamil, it doesn't mean anything. But at least the good thing about MS is she puts music into it so that it is far nicer to listen. Okay, of course, like in the recent years, Subramanya Bharati had used Tamil for the freedom movement. And what you find as Dravidian parties, okay, so while a lot of interesting things they do may not be interesting for us, but a few things they brought some of the literature to the center stage. I think far more literature was available in the last few years. And of course, Tamil University, the power of the net. One of the, in fact, Wikipedia, one of the languages where from the Indian languages contribution was from Tamil font. So in a sense that a lot more things were made available in Tamil. The last one. Okay, I think what is that we are trying to achieve is simple. That particularly for our student friends, I think this is something which they should explore. And particularly in today's world, I remember, so honestly speaking, many of these things I actually picked up when I was studying at Purdue, because many Sundays we used to go to Chicago. My friends used to go to many places, but I always used to get dropped in University of Chicago. University of Chicago Southeast Asian collection had 56,000 books in 1973. Okay, it was so nice. And in those days, books were not easily available. And at least today, everything is available on the net. So it is much more easy for the students today to pursue it. Enormity of literary collections. And I would like renewed interest in classics by Gen Next. And at least places like IIITB, we should strive to give more holistic education. And I think I was very pleasantly pleased that the government accepted the national education policy, which keeps talking about a large holistic education. And I think we are privileged today to have Professor Vijay Patki with us. Sir, I think, you know, if I had known about your interest, I would have requested you to give the talk, but everything was announced. I didn't want to change anything. So maybe you can kind of add to it so that, you know, people can benefit from it. And it's also nice to know about your interest. And he had also suggested maybe we could collaborate, IIITB and his organization. Over to you, Professor Vijay Patki.
So I really won't take much time. This is not the occasion. Professor Sadagopan has given us an extremely engaging talk, and I think we should allow that to settle and we should ruminate over it. I just wanted to make two comments more as a supplement. I got to work on Silappadhikaram almost by accident. I had an invitation from two American directors to send them good contemporary stageable adaptations of Sanskrit texts. In the West, if you say Indian drama, they usually mean Sanskrit, and they usually mean Richakarikam or Shakuntalam. They have no idea of the richness of literature in the South. So I decided to sit down and work on a contemporary English language adaptation of Silappadhikaram. Just for this request. I had been in touch with a Tamil scholar in Coimbatore who had shared his translation with me, and he was very keen that I should do something with it for a contemporary stage. I had put it off for a long time, and this was the occasion. And the response was unbelievable. Anybody in the West who read this adaptation in the English language said they couldn't believe that there existed such literature in the South 1800 years ago. So I just wanted to tell you that there's generally a poor understanding and poor appreciation of Tamil literature from the Sangam period, particularly in the West. And I will stop here. I'll be delighted to continue this conversation. We actually have a great interest in building bridges between the world of science and technology and the world of the arts. I had even designed a course in the humanities for science and technology students, entirely through drama scripts. The course was called The Theatre as Cultural Anthropology. It's really an understanding of social context and history, but through drama. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for
nice. Thank you so
having
much.
me
Thank
over
you.
today.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the evening.
Thank you.
One question has come on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, are there references about the differences between Shiva followers and Vishnu followers in the book?
Okay. Yes and no. You see, what happens is, it is not in the way of, this differs, etc., etc. There are description about Shaiva traditions and Vaishnava traditions. But otherwise, the book itself does not make any comparisons and contrasts. It's just presented for the reader. Okay.
Professor Shivkumar Malpaka says, I was expecting to hear the curse she gave to Madurai in its original language.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I will send it to you. So you know what happens is that you kind of look at something like 45 minutes. What is that you can present? Okay. So I had cuttings of many things, but I just thought that because sometimes what happens is people who are not familiar with the language, reading it gets boring. So I put that music because I thought it makes it a little more interesting. So obviously I lost another about 7-8 minutes. So I will send it across to you. Okay.
Professor S.S. Prabhu says it gives a glimpse of influence of the major happenings in the Indo-Gangetic area with southern India. Was this 400 AD?
Okay. So you see, this is supposed to be 200, 300 kind of AD. Okay. So I think Professor Vijay Patki also alluded to 1800 years back. Okay. So in a sense, it is in that kind of time frame. But as I said, that Sangam literature comes all the way up to 7th century. So this is likely to be in 2nd century.
Again, Professor Srinivas Prasanna says, in Sanskrit and child languages, numeric place order is least significant digit first. Shatatrimsha Sargaha.
Yes.
While in Tamil and other Dravidian languages, it is the opposite. Muvattaru in Kannada. Any pointers to why?
I think good question to research. Okay, sorry, I don't have an answer, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it. Yes.
So I'll just read out what Sujit says to sum up the session. He said simply, just wow, what a rich one. So I think thank you very much, Professor Sadagopan, for kickstarting this series. You have set high standards, and I hope we'll continue with the series with interesting talks, and we'll get to learn from each other. Thank you very much, Professor Sadagopan. Thank you everyone for joining the session and for staying back till that.